Hi, this is Mr. Nobody coming at you with the book review. So for this particular review, I'm actually going to put 4 different books together for the sake of efficiency. We've got False Black Power by Jason Riley, Woke Racism by John McWhorter, White Guilt by Shelby Steele, and Black Rednecks, White Liberals. Now, all of these are kind of similar. These are all unrelated topics. They're all by very smart Black authors, all of which are also familiar with each other. And so some of them I'm going to go through quicker, some I'm going to go through just a little slower, but I'm not going to take too much time on any of them. So False Black Power by Jason Riley, really nice guy. He's a big student of Thomas Sowell, and if you wanted to say, what is this book? This book is Thomas Sowell light. It's just a lot of Thomas Sowell's points summarized. It's if you really want a lot of the background, the arguments, the data, the ideas put more brilliantly, you should really just go straight to the source. But if you want like the really short, easy version of things, this is a good book for that. Sort of similar to that, a little more complicated. Woke Racism by John McWhorter. I love John McWhorter. He's got wonderful linguistic work. He's got a lot of great discussions with Glenn Lowry. His book is good. It's very much, you get from the subtitle, he's talked about a lot how a new religion has betrayed Black America. And if I had any criticism to make of John McWhorter, it's that he doesn't, I think he's right, but I don't think he actually understands religion that well. I don't think he's thought deeply enough about what religion is, how it goes right, how it goes wrong, what it is, what it means for us. And so I'd say, although his theory is correct, and it's a really good book. It's got a lot of wonderful stuff, and it's definitely worth reading. It's also very readable. It's not too long, and I feel like it's also written in a way that is meant to appeal to people in the middle more, and I appreciate that a lot about it. And you know, it's a book that Jason Riley would recommend, and a lot of these people, they would all recommend each other's books. I'm sure they're all sort of doing some of the same work. But he has a really interesting thesis in here, and he explores it. I think he would have explored it even better if he had understood religion better. But I'd say he has a slightly shallow understanding of religion. So it's actually a great book. It's a wonderful book to give to people if who are in the middle and or just have some concerns about some of the things they say going on culturally. But if you want like a really deep dive into this theory and exploration of it with all the brilliant analysis of human nature, that's not what it's doing. So now I'm doing these basically in ascending order. White Guilt by Shelby Steele. Shelby Steele has kind of been writing the same book again and again for decades because he's still trying to get the message across. And he even has a documentary now. And if you want, you can just watch the documentary that he made with his son in the course of an hour or so. You'll get the idea. But this is the book. If I had to pick a single book by Shelby Steele to read, it would be White Guilt. It's a really interesting book. It's very personal. It's very moving. It's very honest. Great talks about his experiences, and he has some wonderful, he really puts forward the idea long before John McWhorter did that there's a religious aspect to race relations, that race relations have actually taken on a sort of religious ritualistic element. And so I find that very interesting. A lot of these people work at or have worked at the Hoover Institution. So that's why there's some unity in their messages. But it's very interesting because for Shelby, he develops it around this historical need that with the degeneration of religion, white people still have, particularly white descendants of Puritanism. Now, he doesn't develop that as much. If I was going to dig into it, I would say read read Albion's Sons, read the part on the Puritans, because the Puritans basically became, your modern Progressive Party. That's basically who they are. They live in the upper Northeast, and they live in California and on the West Coast. That's who they are. They were a very religious people, and there does seem to be this deep sense of religious guilt, and just the fact that they've lost their Puritanism doesn't mean they're not still the same people. And so I feel like that goes a lot of a way towards explaining this white guilt that he talks about. But I think you could take his thesis even further and say, clearly there is a deep societal need for rituals to deal with fundamental questions of almost cosmic guilt. And that's something that it's not just white culture, it seems to be every culture. And that would lead you more, that if you're interested in that subject, you need to jump over to someone more like Jordan Peterson, or into some sort, if you want the psychological approach to it, or, you could get into religious writing. But I think this is actually an incredible book. It's short, it's super easy to read, it's wonderfully well written. He's a professor of English, I believe, so of course his prose is great, and he's a passionate person. So I very much recommend reading this book. Actually, if I had to say pick one book to read out of the 4 books I'm going to talk about here, I would actually pick White Guilt, personally. This is the one that affected me the most, and really told the story in such a concise way where it's like, I get it. I get what you're trying to say. I get what you're bothered by. And it is also a rejection of being a religious icon, essentially, a religious moral icon. So the final book that I want to talk about, this is the big one, Black Rednecks, White Liberals. This is, the oldest of all these books, and in some way inspired some of them, and some of the people. And so this is the big heavy hitter. Of course, you may have heard it talked about by other people online. You can listen to it for free on YouTube, and it's perfect. You can just listen to it if you want. It's full of all sorts of interesting things. If you follow Thomas Sowell at all, a lot of the clips and readings that get put up online, that get reacted to, a lot of them come from this book. This is just a fascinatingly interesting book in general about history, about different cultures, about America, about the Jews, about the Germans. Like, there's so much interesting stuff in here. Like, if you want a true education on American history, American culture, particularly Southern culture and history, and also some other groups, this is kind of like a little bit like Albion's Sons. If you want to read the if you want to understand the different groups from England that came to America, you want to understand them, because there's 4 very distinctive and different groups that came to early America. Very, very different. You want to understand them. Why are they the way they are? And you'll also see, if you read that book, be like, oh, I see all of this still today. We still have these groups with us. Even though we've mixed with each other, these cultures are still very influential in modern America. But of course, lots of other cultures have become part of America, and Thomas Sowell has done a wonderful job in various books exploring those. And this one, in particular, tracks some of those cultures, and he has such an international perspective. I really can't say enough about this book, even if you don't care about the issue of race relations in America. It's just a super interesting book to read. If you're just like, well, I want to understand Germans and how are they unique on an international perspective. It's a fun, short way to look at that. Same thing with the Jews, and it really broadens out your perspectives. So I would definitely recommend reading this book if you have the time and if you have the mind, if you're someone who enjoys a fun historical perspective like that. But it's very readable for being such an education. It's actually wonderfully readable. I think that picking the Germans and the Jews are a good choice too, because there's a sense in which Germans for us have become these icons of evil. Acceptable icons of evil. They become emblematic. Like, they're not just another people group. they're a people group that is used as a symbol. They have a cultural meaning for us and a narrative meaning for us. So it's interesting to actually learn about them as this iconic oppressor and perpetrator. And then the Jews are interesting because they hold a similar position for us of this iconic victim and iconic oppressed. And so it's just interesting to look at them and say, what are they actually like? What are their qualities? What are the things that make people not like them? What are the things that make them succeed or not succeed? How have they ended up in different places? How have they behaved in different places? So it's a very interesting look at these cultures that are actually very iconic. And by looking at the Germans and the Jews, you see their sort of cultures emerge. One of my favorite things about Thomas Sowell is he's just not afraid of facts. He's not intimidated by them. He's willing to have very complex views of things. He's not just a single thesis kind of guy. He gives you a complex picture. He'll say things that some other people wouldn't say. He'll be very upfront and honest. He doesn't try to hide or select bits too much. He's just curious. He wants to know. He wants to understand. And I think he gives you a very good picture. A lot of people who read this book, of course, would say, well, it's important because of the particular view of slavery and race relations that it gives you, Black culture that it gives you. It tells a lot of stories that aren't remembered as well anymore, including stories of great accomplishment. Things like the transformation of Black culture from illiteracy to literacy, and tells that story in a way that, really helps you see, wow, look what was achieved in such a short amount of time. Look how much was changed. Look what people did. Which really gives you a much more complex view into the time and into the people and to everything that people did. More of in the location of that time and a little less in 1 second looking back from such a great distance. I should also point out that Albion's Sons, which I mentioned, is probably the #1 book actually cited in this because it's a wonderful work of history on early America and understanding its culture. And in many ways, this is following on from that book. But so he cites that book a ton. It's David Hackett Fisher. David Hackett Fisher does exhaustive research, and you can tell that the type of history he does is the type of history that Thomas Sowell likes. Tons of information, tons of hard nitty-gritty details of an almost mundane sort that allow you to flesh things out. Questions about how can we understand the difference in a culture, but just how much butter was produced, things like that. Very, very tactile. So if you want to read this book and you really like it and you actually want to understand it even better, I would say your next step actually should be get Albion's Sons. It's a massive book. When I say massive, I mean like huge. I mean like I forget. It's a gigantic tome, hundreds and hundreds of pages, but it's very much arranged into sections. So if you want to dig deeper on one particular group, you can just say, all right, well, I'm just interested in the Scots-Irish. That's all I want to read about. Maybe because your family's Scots-Irish. So you say, okay, I'll just read that section. And that's fine. And then if you're later on, you get more interested, you're like, well, I'm kind of curious about the Quakers, the Puritans. Or maybe you're interested in the Tidewater peoples or the Cavaliers, as they're called too. You can do that. You can dig into that, and you can understand more as you get the appetite for it. Anyway, that's my review of those 4 books. Like I said, if you want quick and easy, I would go for Jason Riley. It's not nearly as well written or as deep, or don't expect too much of it. It's basically just a sort of very simple summary of what the other people have to say, particularly Thomas Sowell. Woke Racism, good book, maybe easier to get people who are more on the fence and in the middle to think about the subject. White Guilt, incredible book, very personal, very moving, really helped me in a focused and tangible way understand some of these issues. And then if you want the grand historical perspective on America, Black rednecks, white liberals. So actually, this is the first Thomas Sowell book I read, and it's the one that if I was going to keep one of his books just sitting out, come back to, just to read for fun, it'd probably be this one. Anyway, that's all for today. Thanks.